So, here's the big question, right? How did a whole century of American policy end up shaping the Middle East that we see on the news every single day? It's not just one thing. Our source material lays it out like a long chain of dominoes, where one decision just knocks over the next and the next and the next. But before we even get started, let's talk about the name itself, the Middle East. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, it's not. The term is actually a pretty confusing invention by Western powers. Get this. The British originally used it to talk about India. Yeah. Then the US had this idea to call the Eastern Bloc the Near East, which would have shifted everything around. That part didn't really catch on, but the name Middle East did. So we're left with this kind of awkward name that everyone just uses. All right, so where does the story of the US in the region really begin? You might be surprised. It starts with the Barbary Pirates. No, seriously. We're talking North Africa, early 1800s. President Thomas Jefferson basically said, we're done paying these guys off, we're going to fight him. This whole thing is actually why the US Marine Corps was created. And it got weird. The US ended up hiring mercenaries and even teamed up with some pirates to go after other pirates. It was a bizarre, messy start to what would become a very long, very messy relationship. Okay, so that brings us to the real heart of this whole story, a history of consequences. We're going to follow the thread, just as the source material does, to see how one action directly led to the next. And our starting point is a really crucial moment back in the 1950s. So here it is, the first domino. The year is 1953. Iran has a popular, democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh, and he does something pretty radical for the time. He looks at his country's massive oil wealth and says, hey, the Iranian people aren't really seeing any of this money. So he nationalizes the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Basically, he takes back control of Iran's oil from the British. As you can imagine, the British were not happy. They were furious, and they ran straight to the US for help. And what happened next is just wild. The first attempt at a coup fails, like completely blows up in their faces. But then this one CIA agent, and get this, it's Theodore Roosevelt's grandson, Kermit Roosevelt, he basically goes rogue. His plan? It's ingenious in a really dark way. He literally hires a bunch of guys off the street and pays them to run around, riot, and cause chaos, all while pretending to be supporters of Mossadegh. This fake instability was all the cover the Iranian army needed to swoop in, arrest Mossadegh, and boom, the democratic government was gone. So what's the immediate fallout? Well, the US successfully gets rid of a democracy and puts the Shah in charge as an absolute king. And for the next 25 years, he's a brutal dictator to his own people, but to the US, he's one of their best buddies in the Cold War. They even called Iran Little America. This one event, this single coup, is what kicks off, well, pretty much everything else we're about to talk about. And this is where things get really crazy. Our source calls this next phase the Great Reversal. It's all about how your best friend one day can become your worst enemy the next. The speed is just dizzying. Just look at how fast this all happens. In 1979, boom, the Iranian Revolution hits and topples the Shah. Just like that, America's #1 ally in the region is now its #1 enemy. So what does the US do? Looking for payback and a way to hem in this new Iran, it turns to, you guessed it, a new friend. Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein. The US essentially tells him, go ahead, invade Iran, and that starts a horrific 8-year-long war. I mean, the whiplash here is just incredible. Before 1979, Iran was so trusted that the US sold them their best F-14 fighter jets. We're talking top-tier tech that even Israel didn't have. Then, almost overnight, they're the arch-enemy. It's a total 180. And the flip-flop with Saddam Hussein is just as shocking. In the 80s, he's a good friend who the US is giving intelligence, equipment, and even the components for chemical weapons to use against Iran. A few years later, he invades Kuwait, and suddenly he's being called the new Hitler. The turnaround is just stunning. And all of this, of course, leads us directly to the next chapter, the 2 major US wars in Iraq. Both of them grew right out of the chaos of that first US-backed war between Iran and Iraq. So you have to ask, why did Saddam think he could just invade Kuwait? Well, the source points to this really critical meeting. Right before the invasion, he sits down with the US ambassador, April Glaspie. He kind of brings up his beef with Kuwait, and she reportedly tells him, what happens with Arab states is of no concern to the United States. Now, Saddam heard that, and he took it as a big, blinking green light. He thought he had a free pass. He was wrong. The US response was massive. The air war Operation Desert Storm was on a scale that's hard to even wrap your head around. Think about this. In just a few weeks, the U.S. dropped more tonnage of bombs on Iraq than was used in all 8 years of World War II. That includes both atomic bombs. It's just a staggering amount of firepower. And after the bomb stopped, something else began: the sanctions. For more than a decade, Iraq was put under this incredibly harsh sanctions regime. We're talking cut off from basic things like food, medicine, supplies. The source we're looking at cites UN figures that are just devastating. An estimated 1.2 million Iraqis died because of these sanctions. You can just imagine the bitterness and anger that created. It was basically a breeding ground for future extremism. And if that number isn't shocking enough, dig into it a little deeper. Of that 1.2 million, it's estimated that 500,000 were children under the age of 5. This happened mostly during the Clinton years. It was just this quiet, slow-motion disaster that completely defined a whole generation of Iraqis. Which brings us to the last and maybe the most crucial domino to fall in this whole chain: the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the enormous power vacuum that it ripped open. So right after the invasion, the U.S. authorities on the ground make 2 decisions that would change everything. Decision number 1, de-Baathification. That sounds complicated, but it basically meant they fired everyone in the government. Not just the big shots, we're talking everybody, all the way down to school teachers. Decision number 2, they completely disbanded the Iraqi army. Just like that, hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers with weapons were suddenly unemployed and sent home. The results of those 2 orders was instant and catastrophic. Literally overnight, Iraq just stopped being a country. There was no government, no police, no army, no one to keep the lights on or the water running. It was a complete and total power vacuum. So what rushes in to fill a vacuum like that? Well, after years and billions of dollars spent building a new Iraqi army, look what happened. This chart tells the story. In 2014, a tiny group of ISIS fighters, we're talking maybe 800 guys, just completely rolled over tens of thousands of US-trained Iraqi soldiers. They took over huge cities. It shocked everyone, and it was the ultimate proof that the state had completely failed. And that's where this story leaves us. From that CIA coup in Iran all the way to the invasion of Iraq, our source draws a straight, unbroken line. Each intervention just set the stage for the next crisis, which then required another intervention. What you're left with is this massive, decades-long power vacuum in one of the most important regions in the world. And the question that leaves us all with is, what or who is going to fill that vacuum next?